Welcome to Scott's Shelf. We're doing book reviews, and today we're going to talk about Flourish by Martin Seligman. So Flourish by Martin Seligman is a discussion of positive psychology, and he differentiates some of his happiness theory, which he's talked about in the past, from his current thinking about defining this aim of positive psychology in terms of well-being, and goes into the components of that. So Flourish is a long book, but provides a lot of deep benefit for folks who want to understand the how, the mechanics of why certain things like a gratitude practice or being kind to other people is going to increase one's own well-being or lead to more positive outcomes in the world. So Flourish by Martin Seligman, fantastic overview of positive psychology with a lot of background and citations of studies that Seligman either references or has worked on himself. So who would benefit from reading Flourish? First of all, skeptics of positive psychology. And I've talked about this in a couple of other presentations with my mindset coaching business. Positive psychology gets a bad rap because there was a movement a few decades ago that promoted basically positive delusions. And that's not what Martin Seligman is talking about. He's talking about trying to make a positive impact in your own life, in the lives of the people around you, not any kind of sugarcoating or denial or spin or burying one's head in the sand. So if you have some of that holdover and feel like positive psychology is just about imagining everything as rainbows and unicorns and ignoring all the negative aspects of life, Flourish can help you understand what Seligman and a lot of other researchers mean by positive psychology and how those concepts maybe can become more relevant in your life. And the second type of person who would benefit from reading Flourish are practitioners of positive psychology who want deeper explanations. So this comes up in my discussion of the book, The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. I'm a questioner. So for me, once I understand why something works or how it works or what the goal is, I'm much more likely to follow through on that process or practice. So if you want a deeper connection with some of those positive psychology practices, especially if you're a mindset coach like myself, it's worth digging into the book Flourish and taking it seriously. So my takeaways from Flourish, one is the idea that positive psychology is aimed at more than just happiness. So Seligman unfolds this acronym that he calls PERMA. So it stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. So those five things together constitute what he's talking about in terms of well-being. And that's more than just the positive emotion piece, the P in PERMA. And so it's a more comprehensive assessment of how people are doing in their lives, including the subjective positive mood measurements, but also capturing deeper aspects of how their life is going in terms of meaning and achievement and relationships. So it's more than just happiness. And I've got that sense from some of the other books I read, but Flourish, Seligman does a great job of outlining those five aspects and then showing how measures can be made more useful and statistically relevant by focusing on the right kinds of indicators. So he brings more than just happiness and positive mood into the discussion around positive psychology in the book Flourish. Second, optimism is more like archaeology. So his discussion of optimism is fantastic, and it gives one the sense that there is something good that you can do. There is something worth finding in this situation. And if you have an optimistic attitude, you have a much higher chance of finding whatever is beneficial, even in a negative situation. And so to me, that just struck me as like performing archaeology, right? You're trying to find something valuable in all this dirt. Maybe if you're, less intellectually inclined and more a pirate fan, you'll think of searching for buried treasure. And I think that's a great way to think about optimism. And that differentiates it from this idea of sugarcoating or denial. But optimism is the attitude that lets you find something useful in any situation. Third takeaway was boundaries for worst case thinking. So for a while, as a park ranger, I was dealing with the worst days of some people's lives in which their family members were lost and possibly dead. And so it really helped me put boundaries on worst case thinking. So when I'm in a separate situation where like, oh, I'm really tense about giving this presentation or, facilitating a meeting, what if I, screw up? It lets me put some boundaries on there. Like, I'm not going to die from doing a stupid presentation and having everybody in the room think that I'm an idiot. And so Seligman walks people through something similar where, okay, some part of our mind is wired up to be negative. And that's very beneficial from an evolutionary perspective. There are things out there in the world that can kill us. And so we need to avoid those threats. The problem is we start using that central nervous system response, that threat response, for everything, even things that aren't life-threatening at all. And so when we set boundaries, like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? I can imagine some fantastic scenarios where meteors hit the Earth, but like really, let's bring it back in. What's the most likely bad situation from me giving a horrible presentation? A few people think slightly less of me and then go on with their lives. They may even come back for a future presentation of mine. So his description of how to bound worst case scenario thinking so that we can keep ourselves more effective in the moment in a stressful situation and more effective preparing for those situations was fantastic. I really liked the bounding of worst case thinking. Next, discover and use your strengths. So as a CrossFit coach, I have a tendency to really prioritize working on weaknesses, right? We're only as strong as our weakest link. And in the physical fitness realm, if I can lift really heavy weights, but I get winded walking from my couch to the television, then that lack of cardiovascular fitness is the area that I should attack the most because I'll get the biggest gains there. So Seligman flips things a little bit and gives a good explanation why it's also useful to emphasize your strengths. So in emphasizing your strengths, you get to move, say, a performance or a competitive outlet more towards the arena where you're likely to do well, which is awesome. In everyday life, you need to not lose track of your strengths and not fall into the trap of only negative thinking and only thinking about weaknesses, because then you lose motivation. So his discussion on how to discover your strengths and then what to do with that was great. There's a link in my Mighty Networks discussion on Flourish to his signature strengths survey. And so you can take that for free. You can download the information. He ranks 24 character strengths. And based on you taking this test, he lists them in order from your strongest strengths to your weakest strengths. And then there's various ways you can use that information. I found it an interesting description, and it highlighted a few things for me personally that were different than I expected. Lastly, he talks about overcoming learned helplessness. So this wasn't a familiar term to me. The concept was interesting. So he had done some research. Seligman had done research on animals learning that what they did didn't affect the outcome. So I've definitely found this in some coaching clients. I found this in teammates. I've found it in myself on occasion where I feel like nothing I do matters in this situation or in this context. And he talks about how precursors can set us up for that. And then the horrible cascade of helplessness that happens afterwards is fairly obvious. You stop trying. So he talks about how to overcome learned helplessness. And there's some great elements there, really practically implementable pieces for getting people to recognize that just what we do matters in small ways. And so we need to build in some cases, with people who are really challenged by this learned helplessness, we need to build them little stepping stones out of that negative way of thinking. Connections. So Flourish connects with a bunch of other works that I've read. So the self-improvement literature, so things like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life and Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Also Ryan Holiday. So Ryan Holiday has some fantastic works where he draws from the wisdom of the Stoic philosophers in books like Ego is the Enemy and The Obstacle is the Way. And all of these other authors are referencing at least positive psychology and methods of positive psychology. So if you're interested in how those methods of positive psychology work and you want more of the nuts and bolts, definitely read Flourish. Second, if you're a high performer or coaching people who are in a high performance field or activity, and you've read works like Josh Waitzkin's Art of Learning or Stephen Kotler's Art of Impossible, then you'd be interested in the aspects of Flourish where he talks about becoming more effective and really harnessing the power of positive psychology in order to gain more traction in your field of pursuit. Next, the idea surrounding meaning. So if you're interested in how we subjectively interpret meaning within our lives, so if you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, or Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, or any of Simon Sinek's work, especially Start with Why, Find with Why, or Find Your Why, or Leaders Eat Last. Those would be useful bridges to read Flourish. So you get, again, more of the nuts and bolts about how we perceive, as Seligman calls it, well-being. Meaning is a big part of that. And so he can explain, again, some of the nuts and bolts for how we can build that in ourselves. And lastly, if you're interested in some of the societal trends works that are here on Scott's shelf, so Matt Ridley's Rational Optimist, Yuval Harari, Sapiens, and Mr. Tupy, they talk about how broad societal trends are, human society is making it easier to solve some problems. And we lose track of that. We lose sight of the problems that we've solved. And so those 3 authors look back and say, hey, look, here's how life used to be, 1,000,000, 1,000, 500 years ago. And here's the trends that are happening. And here's the little pieces that I think are key in that. So you may be interested in the relationship aspects of positive psychology within Flourish by Martin Seligman, if you enjoy those books by Ridley, Harari, or Tupy. So thanks for listening to my discussion of Flourish. If you want a deeper discussion, you want more back and forth, head on over to the Mighty Network site, scotts-shelf.mn.co, and you can sign up there for more resources and links. And we'll occasionally put on live book clubs or courses. And so you can find all that stuff over there on scotts-shelf.mn.co. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this, and I look forward to the next installment of Scott's Shelf.